Hey, good morning, everyone. It is so good to be with you today. It's been a while, I know, but I am not sure that you realize how difficult it is to be invited to speak here at Celebration Church. Last week, Pastor Chip called and said, Larry, I have some questions for you. I said, sure. He says, do you believe in the Constitution of the United States? I said, sure, I believe in that. And he said, well, do you believe in the Bill of Rights? I said, yes, I believe in the Bill of Rights. He said, do you believe in free speech? I said, of course I believe in free speech. He said, then come to Celebration Church and give one. I guess the moral of that story is be careful what you believe in these days. Well, it's always an honor to be able to look at God's Word together with you and to see what great and amazing lessons He has for us. And today I would like to consider one of the most familiar stories in the Old Testament from the book of Daniel. Now, perhaps the most recognizable event of Daniel's life was a little soiree he had with the pride of lions. Now, flannel graphs would spring to life when Mrs. Basie would bring those pieces of felt out for her third grade class. Little boys would just light up hoping to catch a glimpse of some blood and gore. And the little girls, of course, would be disgusted by the little boys' lack of maturity. But all of them were bright-eyed and eager to see what was going to happen in this Old Testament story. Now, if you've been a Christian for any amount of time, you are probably familiar with the overall storyline, but you might be a little fuzzy as to the actual reason why Daniel was thrown into this den of lions. You see, the bottom line is that Daniel chapter 6 is a story of a trial that did not go well for the defendant. He was hauled into court on ridiculous charges designed to destroy his credibility and his reputation. And the plot has all the twists and the turns that you'd expect from a John Grisham novel. And in the end, Daniel is found guilty, of course, and he is sentenced to death by consumption. Now, I spoke on this passage recently, and whenever I begin preparations for a message, I always go through my files looking for anything that I'd ever done before in the past on the subject. Turns out, the only time I ever preached on Daniel chapter 6 was on December 11th, 1994. That's a long time ago. I mean, that's back when Al Gore was just inventing the internet. It was also the time when another trial was just starting in which that defendant was also trying to clear his name. That trial, of course, was the People versus Orenthal James Simpson, better known as OJ. The two trials and their outcomes could not have been more different. So let's take a few moments and set the stage for our story today. The nation of Israel was probably at its zenith about 1000 BC. That was under the leadership of King David. He was a man after God's own heart, yet his reign was not without some bumps in the road, and he turned over a less than stable government to his son Solomon. Now, although Solomon had a triple portion of wisdom, he made some huge errors along the way of judgment. And the united nation fell into deep discord at Solomon's death. Israel was split into two kingdoms. With Israel in the north, we had Judah in the south. Now, Israel had the misfortune of having one godless king after another, until finally God said, that's enough, you're done. And so in 722 BC, the northern kingdom of Israel was conquered by the Assyrians, and they were history. Now, the southern kingdom of Judah fared a little bit better because they had a few godly kings along the way that kept them in favor with God. But eventually, they too succumbed to the evil practices. The surrounding pagan nations, they disobeyed God's word. And in 605 BC, the Babylonian king, Nebuchadnezzar, attacked the capital city of Jerusalem. He looted the temple of its national treasures and then took the finest young men from the royal family to serve in the Babylonian Empire. Now, Daniel chapter 1, verses 4 and 5, give a bit of a description about these lads. It says that these young men, without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He, meaning Ashpenaz, who was the chief of the court officials, was to teach them the language and the literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table, and they were to be trained for 3 years, and after that they were to enter the king's service. Now, among those young men, there were 4 standouts. They were Azariah, Hananiah, Mishael, and of course Daniel. And in verses 17 to 20, we kind of get a glimpse into their personal lives now. So, verse 17, to these 4 men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning, and Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them in, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, and so they entered into the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. These guys were the cream of the crop. They were blessed by God in every way possible. And so what was really a very tragic season for the nation of Israel and Judah, it turned out to be a pretty good gig for these 4 young Hebrew boys. And everybody lived happily ever after. Amen. Let's go ahead and pray and head on home and have lunch. Some of you are actually getting excited because you thought it was really going to be over. But as you know, things don't always go well for those who stand up for the Lord, do they? And it didn't take long for these old-time government officials to become filled with jealousy and malice at their success. You know, it's been said that jealousy is the tribute that mediocrity pays to genius. These officials set out with a vengeance to take him down. Azariah, Hananiah, and Mishael were renamed Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, had an intimate hands-on encounter with a fiery furnace. And Daniel, of course, was thrown into the lions to silence his testimony of God's goodness and provision. Daniel did, however, enjoy a season of blessing and prosperity. But it all went south in chapter 6. After serving King Nebuchadnezzar and then briefly his son Belshazzar for almost 40 years, this new kid on the block, there was a new kid on the block and a new world power. The Babylonian Empire had given way to the Medes and Persians, and Darius became the new king. Now, Daniel's position and tenure were at risk. But King Darius soon realized that Daniel was an extraordinary individual. He had amazing talents and abilities, and his character was flawless. And so he wasted no time in appointing him as his right-hand man in terms of being over the entire Medo-Persian Empire. Again, that political maneuver did not sit well with the other administrators. And so they began planning a way to get rid of this Hebrew outsider. The trap they devised was foolproof. It had 2 absolute certainties. The details are laid out here in chapter 6, verses 6 through 8. So the administrators and the satraps went as a group to the king and said, "O King Darius, live forever. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue a decree and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or man during the next 30 days, except you, O king, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, O king, issue the decree and put into writing so that it cannot be altered in accordance with the laws of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed." So you see, the first certainty is obvious. They played upon the vanity of this new king. I mean, just stop and think about it. What monarch could possibly resist that piece of legislation. Essentially, they were saying, Darius, you're the best. And we just love you, man. And please let us have an entire month just to sing your praises and to worship you like you deserve. Darius heard that. He said, oh, shucks. I don't know if that's literally how it is in Hebrew, but it was something like that. And he said, do you really think so? And he said, okay, but just for 30 days, because I don't want to get a big head or anything, So in verse 9, he signed this decree into law. Now the second certainty that they could count on was Daniel's total allegiance to the sovereign God of the Bible. They knew his daily routine consisted of praying to God in the upstairs room of his home with the windows wide open so that he could face his beloved city of Jerusalem. In fact, he did that 3 times a day. He wasn't about to forsake that precious time with God for a silly, egotistical decree. So the trap was set. There would be no escape. They witnessed Daniel's prayers to Jehovah. They essentially posted it on YouTube. It went viral. In verse 15, we see what happened. They went as a group to the king and said to him, you remember, O king, that according to the laws of the Medes and the Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed. Do you remember saying that? And we all saw Daniel praying to his God. The text tells us Darius was greatly distressed. He was confronted with that evidence. He tried everything to think of to get out of it, but in that exact moment in time, he was stabbed with the iron teeth of 2 realities. Reality number 1 was the stupidity of his vain decree. And secondly was the integrity of this Hebrew named Daniel. Now verse 16 tells us the very tragic results of this foolish decision. The king gave the order. They brought Daniel, threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, may your God whom you serve continually rescue you. And with that, Darius went back to his palace. He was overcome with regret. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't eat. There was nothing on TV. He was miserable. And he had just sentenced the brightest and the most loyal advisor he had ever known to death. Now, we got to stop right here, I think, and try to picture what has just happened in verse 16. Now, if you are successful in actually stepping into the text, you'll see that the story changes from a PG to an NC-17. It's just a single sentence with no additional commentary, and although Daniel trusted God, that experience had to have been absolutely terrifying for Daniel. I mean, have you ever been in the presence of a pride of lions without bars, without cars, just in their midst? I mean, there is a reason why they are called the king of the beasts. A male lion, 400 pounds, 10 feet long. They can run up to 50 miles an hour. They can jump 35 feet. They can crush the femur bone, that big bone in your leg there, with a single bite. A male lion can eat 10 to 15 pounds of meat in a single sitting. The roar of the lion can be heard from 5 miles away. Daniel was unceremoniously just thrown into their midst. And too often I am afraid that the biblical account is watered down. I mean, the flannel graph just, depicts Clarence, the cross-eyed lion. He's got a toothache. He's not really hungry. And so they don't do anything. It's no big deal. It's just a cute little story for kids. Years ago, I remember going through the land exhibit at the African Marine World USA in Oakland, California. was listening to the guy describe the character of a lion. It was up close and personal. And I remember him saying distinctly, I am a lion trainer, not a lion tamer. The reason is because lions cannot be tamed. It is not in their nature. And they can turn on you without hesitation. So again, we are sitting here in the warmth and the comfort and the safety of this auditorium, and I am not sure that we can totally fathom the scope of the horror experienced by Daniel. Oh, sure, he was a man of faith, but that does not remove the human emotion from the story. I remember a few years ago sitting with a dear friend, a very godly man who was on his deathbed. And we talked very candidly about his experience. I'll never forget what he said. Pastor Larry, I am not afraid of death, only dying. And when there's a huge difference between death and the dying process. And I'm sure Daniel faced the trial with courage, but it couldn't have been an easy assignment. It was William Shakespeare who penned the words, cowards may die many times before their deaths. The valiant never taste death but once. Do we have the picture? The story continues, verses 19 to 23. At the first light of dawn, the king got up, he hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice. Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve, continually been able to rescue you from the lions? Daniel answered, O king, live forever. My God sent his angels and shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, O king. And the king was overjoyed. Gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. When Daniel was lifted out of the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. You gotta love those happy endings, don't you? I guess you could say the moral of the story, trust in God, every little thing gonna be all right. But you know, when I read this passage, I am always left with a troubling observation. Let me share that with you before we bring this deal in for a landing today. I mean, how many of you agree with that song that we sang just before I got here? Do you remember the song? It's called Great is Thy Faithfulness. How many believe that God is a faithful God? Amen. Most of you, some of you, the verdict's still out. I get you. Here's the sticking point of the story. If God is indeed faithful, why did Daniel have to experience the agony of this betrayal by his governmental officials? And then why did he have to experience the horror of being thrown into this lion's den? I mean, let's take a second and review the facts, okay? Number one, Daniel prayed 3 times a day, clearly more than just a ritual. From all we know about him, he was a true man of God in every sense of the word. Number 2, out of his relationship with God, he served God continually. The text states that twice in this passage. Number 3, he excelled in his ministry and his work. Number 4, he demonstrated the highest moral and ethical character, the very definition of righteousness. And number 5, he trusted God wholeheartedly. He was a man of faith. He did everything he was supposed to. And yet, he suffered this horrifying experience. Even though he believed, and we believe, in the faithfulness of God. And so if God is faithful, why does he have to go through this? There's oftentimes some confusion about the definition of the term God's faithfulness. You know, the most popular idea of God's faithfulness is this. If I jump through all the hoops, 1, 2, 3, 4, God's going to take care of me. Specifically, he is going to spare me from lion's den experiences, from betrayals, from accidents, from defamation of character, from hurt, from heartache, from disappointment. But reality proves that definition to be false over and over again, doesn't it? I mean, of all the great men and women of the Bible, can you name one who did not have a lion's den experience? Out of all the great men and women of faith who have lived during the age of the church, the last 2,000 years, can you name one who did not suffer hardship, persecution, and disappointment? Look at your own life. Anybody here love Jesus? A couple of you? Good. Have you ever had any trials or tribulations during your walk with Jesus? See, the message of Daniel chapter 6 clearly shows that the faithfulness of God does not protect us from the harms of this world. And over the years, so many have turned away from their Christian faith because God did not come through for them the way that they wanted God to come through for them. You know, I probably have at least 3 or 4 books in my library. I don't have many more, I don't think, that they were entitled God's Book of Promises. I mean, there are thousands of promises in the Word of God for His people, which is a tremendous source of comfort and assurance. But the problem comes when we try to hold God accountable for promises He never made. In our finite minds, we think God should do this, He should do this, and then He should do this. And when the sovereign, almighty God of the universe does not grant my 3 wishes, I'm ready to trade Him in for a new model. You see, it's the problem of reinventing God. God is up there, but we like Him down here where we can control Him. You know, and if there's something about His ways or His word or His character that we don't like, we simply get out a bottle of whiteout and we make Him into the God that we are more comfortable with. It was the French philosopher Voltaire, extremely critical of Christianity and of the church, who once said, God created man in His own image, and now we are returning the favor. It's really the definition of idolatry. We lower our view of God while elevating the view of ourselves. And that is a formula that has never worked well for followers of Jesus. See, here is where we come to the real message of Daniel chapter 6. God is faithful. Absolutely. But not to spare me from life's adversities. Rather, God is faithful to walk with me through life's adversities. Now, if you were to jump back in the story of Daniel to chapter 3, it's a story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, which I always thought was pronounced Meshach or Shacker the Bungalow. But we see another spot-on description of God's faithfulness. These 3 men of God would not bow before this insane statue of Nebuchadnezzar, and they were threatened with death by incineration. But note their response in chapter 3. This is verse 16 through 18. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us from it, and He will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if He does not, I want you to know, O king, we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. Nebuchadnezzar was furious with their response and threw them into the furnace. And once again, God's faithful servants go through a terrifying experience. But verse 25 reminds us that they were not in that trial alone. God was with them. Daniel in the lion's den, not alone. God was with him. Sometimes in life, men and women, God spares us from fiery furnaces and lions' dens. And sometimes He does not. But the promise is that God will never leave you and God will not forsake you. And you will never go through it alone. The Bible is full of so many amazing descriptions of God's faithfulness. For example, God is faithful to always love you, no matter what you have done. God loves you. We just read this verse from Romans 8:39 just a few minutes ago. Paul just says there's nothing. No, there's nothing that can separate you from God's love that is in Christ Jesus. Nothing. God is faithful to love you. Number two, God is faithful to grow you up in the image of Christ. His will for you, His desire for you is that your character would reflect the purity and the holiness of His Son, Jesus. Romans chapter 8, verse 29. Paul again says, hey, from the beginning of time, God predestined you. That means He looked through the corners of time and He saw your face. And He saw you and He said, oh man, I love you so much. I want you to be like my Son, Jesus, and to represent His splendor. That's my will for your life. God is always faithful to do what's right, to do that which is just, because God is just. You may not always see it. You may not always agree with it. But God is a God of justice. Human trials are imperfect. Like the one I mentioned back in 1994. Sometimes the guilty go free. And sometimes the innocent go into the lion's den. But there is no escape from the perfect justice of God. Notice how the story ends here, and how justice is served in Daniel 6:24. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in, thrown into the lion's den, along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Now, the flannel graphs don't usually include that verse. That's a pretty horrific example of the consequences of man's sin. But the point, sometimes God's justice happens in this life, sometimes it happens in the life to come. But bottom line, God is always faithful to do what is right. Men and women, when the lion's den experiences come your way, and they will, the great temptation is to take your eyes off the crowd and to stare at your circumstances. And the prayer becomes that of a prayer of desperation. Oh God, spare me from the pain and from the trials and from the tribulations. But Daniel chapter 6 is clearly telling us that our prayer should be instead, oh God, help me to experience your presence in the midst of my suffering. Because you, oh God, are faithful. God, help me to keep my eyes on you and not on the lions. You know, tucked away back in 2 Kings chapter 4, a simple little illustration of this principle. The prophet's name was Elisha, and he would travel all around the area, and he would stop in this town called Shunem, and there was a woman there, and we don't know her name. She was just a Shunammite woman. And she would take Elisha in and give him a meal. And so one day she said to her husband, you know, let's do some little remodeling here, head down to Home Depot and get some stuff and make a little room for him up above. That's exactly what they did. And so Elisha came by and they showed him his very own room, and he could go up there and there was a bed. And Elisha was so overcome with gratitude that he said to his servant Gehazi, what can we do for her? She's just been so gracious. How can we help her out? Gehazi says, well, you know, she doesn't have a son. So Elisha says to her, this time next year, you're going to have a boy. She said, stop. Stop it. She said, don't even think about getting my hopes up like that. He said, no, I'm serious. Next time I come by in a year, you'll have a boy. Sure enough, next year, she had a son. The story continues, fast forwards for a little bit. The boy is 9, 10 years old, and he's out in the field with his dad. Starts complaining of a headache. The dad says, hey, take him home. They took the son home, sat on his mom's lap there for a little bit, and he died. The boy died. The dad comes home from plowing out in the field, and he asks his wife this question. How are things? How's it going? You know what her response is? It's all right. She says, but I do need a donkey and a servant. I'm going to go see Elisha right away. I need to leave right now. So she heads to Mount Carmel. She's on her way to Mount Carmel. Elisha's at his desk, doing very important prophet stuff. Looks out the window, and he sees the woman coming. And he says, hey, Gehazi, go down and see the woman, the Shunammite woman. She's coming to see me. And go ask her how it is with her husband. See how she is, and see how it's going with the boy. And so Gehazi runs down there, and he says, how are things? And again, the woman says, it's all right. She falls at Elisha's feet, and she says, the boy you've given me, the boy that came through you from God, is dead. Elisha says, Gehazi, take my staff, go back to the house, raise the boy up. She falls at his feet and holds his legs and says, no, I will not settle for Gehazi. I want you. Elisha says, let's go. They head back to Shunem. They get there. He sends Gehazi in with the staff. He says, go in there and raise the boy. Gehazi goes in there and says, man, the boy's still dead. Elisha rolls into the room, lays down on the boy, breathes into him, and the boy comes back to life. I think, men and women, how many times do we settle for Gehazis? How many times do we take our eyes off of the God who has given us life itself? Focus on the problem. And we become consumed with the crisis. And we forget that God is faithful and that He is in our midst, and our prayer needs to be, oh God, help me to experience you and your strength in the midst of my lion's den. Oh God, I pray this in your name. Help me to get my eyes off of my circumstances and gaze at you, because you are faithful and you are always with me.